Namo Buddhaya, and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV Sunday program. I am Lisa Chu. Today's Dharma talk is by a highly respected Buddhist monk from the United Kingdom, Venerable Ananda Jyoti. The Venerable has devoted many years to study and research Buddhism, delving deeply into a wide range of important topics. In this series of talks, he presents an insightful exploration of the life of Buddha, focusing on three significant events: his birth, his enlightenment, and his final passing away. These lectures are rich in historical research, backed by numerous facts that brings clarity and depth to his presentation. This three-part series is not to be missed. Each part offers a rare opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of the Buddha's life through scholarly, yet accessible teaching. Now, please join me in welcoming the Venerable Ananda Jyoti Mahathera to deliver the second part of this remarkable series.
Okay, so tonight is the May full moon night. In Pali it's called Visakha Punyamasa, and in Sinhala it's called Vesak Poya. It's from the Sinhala that we get the common name for the celebration now as Vesak. And today we celebrate three things mainly, which is the birth, the awakening, and the passing of Lord Buddha. So these three things put together in a way summarize the life of the Buddha as well, because they cover the three periods. Now there's a kind of problem about where to start when we're talking about the life of the Buddha, because in Buddhism we don't feel like a person's life stream is just confined to one life, but it goes through many lives. While we were doing the renovations, we've put up the 28 Buddhas. It starts at here, comes up here, and then goes down here. So our Lord Buddha, who is the 28th over here, he made his aspiration to become a Buddha under the fourth of the Buddhas over here, Dipankara. Yeah. That's 24 Buddhas before our Lord Buddha, because the Lord Buddha was traveling in samsara for 4 incalculable periods and for 100,000 aeons. So it's a very, very long time. And under each of these Buddhas, the 24 who preceded our Lord Gautama Buddha, he confirmed the aspiration that he would become a Buddha in the end. At the time of Dipankara Buddha, he was known as Sumedha, and then he did something rather wonderful. He was already a very developed ascetic as Sumedha. He had the abhinyas and the jhanas, was very well developed in the spiritual life. But he heard that a Buddha had arisen in the world and that people were preparing to welcome him to the city. So he decided to also join in and to help with the preparations. And then as the Buddha Dipankara was coming along, he made a bridge out of his own body for the Buddha to pass over a pool of water and mud, so the Buddha's feet would not become dirtied or anything. And after that, he made his aspiration to become a Buddha at some time in the future. And Lord Buddha Dipankara confirmed that aspiration. Then for all that time, a really long time, so many hundreds of thousands of aeons, and then incalculable periods which are longer than those periods, he was practicing the perfections, the parami, during this long sojourn in samsara. His last life he was known as Vesantara, and it's in his life as Vesantara that he completed the paramis. That means he had fulfilled all of the paramis. There's 10 paramis in the way we see it in our tradition. There are 10 paramis, and the last one that was completed was the Dharma parami. And Vesantara, through his great generosity, it's sometimes known, the story is sometimes known as the great generosity of Vesantara. So through his great generosity, then he fulfilled the final one of the paramis, and after that he was reborn in Tusita heaven. That's a high heaven, as the Deva Santusita. He's sometimes called Santusita. He's sometimes identified as Setaketu. Setaketu means like white banner or white flag. But he was reborn there, and it's a Dhammata. It means it's something that always occurs, that the the Bodhisattva in his last life, before he takes rebirth as a human in his last life, he is in Tusita heaven as a Deva. And now we understand also that the next Buddha, that means Metteyya Buddha, is also now in Tusita heaven. And you know, in Tusita heaven, the time periods are very, very long. Okay, so he will be reborn at a far distant time in the future and will eventually become Metteyya Buddha. Now the gods who were in Tusita heaven decided to request the Bodhisattva to take rebirth in his last life. Yeah. So they gathered around, all the gods, not only from Tusita heaven, but from many of the other heavens, gathered round, and they asked Santusita if he was ready and prepared to take birth again for the good of the people and for the good of all beings, and then become a Buddha and give the Dhamma teaching. So the Bodhisattva had to make certain investigations to see if it was the right time and everything. One of the investigations is the right time. Another of the investigations is whether the continent was suitable. So the continent is what in those days was called Jambudvipa. It's what we now call India. Yeah. So that was the right continent. It's understood that the Buddhas always get reborn in Jambudvipa. Then the right people, he had to find the right people, so the right people were the Sakyans, small people really on the edge of the Himalaya, and then the right family, which was King Suddhodana's family, and then to check the mother's lifespan. So this was also important because it's another Dhammata, it's another thing that always happens, is that the Bodhisattva's mother lives just for the period of the pregnancy, and 1 week later she passes away. So they had to know the right time as well. So, investigating all these things, he found that all of these things were right and were set up for the right occasion. And that was the July full moon night. Yeah? And it was at the end of a 10-day festival that was taking place before the Asala full moon night. And the king and the family had been engaged in this festival, leading the festival, which was an important, if you like, midsummer festival that was taking place before the Asala full moon, which is, if you think about it, 10 lunar moons before Vesak. Yeah. So it was on that night that Queen Maya, who was the principal queen of King Suddhodana, had a dream. And the dream is like a presage of the future and of what was to happen. And so she dreamed that the 4 great kings, those are the lower dwelling devas just above our world, the 4 great kings came down and they picked her up on the couch that she was reclining on and took her to the Himalayas. And then the queens of the 4 great kings, they bathed Mahamaya, and it's like a purification rite, if you like, to make sure she's clean and that she's pure. And then she dreamt that a white elephant appeared and came closer and closer to her, and then entered through the right side. Later we will see when the Bodhisattva is born, he is also born from the right side. So the elephant is also a very powerful being. And in Pali, there's a word, Naga. You've heard of Naga. This word Naga, it means many different things. One of the things it means is a cobra. A cobra is a very powerful being. It can bring your life to an end in very short order. An elephant is also called a Naga because it's such a powerful being, the largest creature in the jungle, really. And then an Arahat is also called a Naga because an Arahat is the most powerful of the human beings, like this. So the Bodhisattva appeared as an elephant and as a white elephant. White is a sign of purity, elephant is a sign of power, and then entered into her womb through the right-hand side. So she had this dream, and at the same time, Santusita, who was in Tusita heaven, descended from Nandanavana, from the Nandana grove, and entered into Mahamaya's womb as the, during the conception, as the being who would be born and would be known later as Siddhartha. Okay, in the morning she went to the king and she told about the dream that she'd had, and then they called the Brahmins at court, the priests who were at court, who could interpret the dreams and so on, called the Brahmins to interpret the dream. And so the Brahmins were able to interpret that it meant that she was now pregnant, and pregnant with a great being who would be born, who would be the son and heir of King Suddhodana. Now there's some other quite wonderful things that are said about this pregnancy. For instance, it's said that while the Bodhisattva was in the womb, that he always sat in cross-legged position, taking up the position that he would take at the foot of the Bodhi tree later. Again, you see, it's an auspicious sign, if you like. And then, because the Bodhisattva is sat in the womb, yeah, it's like the womb is a chaitya, like it's a stupa. It's a relic chamber. The relic, of course, is going to be the Buddha, eventually, and the womb is like the chamber that is containing the fetus that would become this great being. And the devas, during the pregnancy period, also kept watch over the queen to make sure that she was safe and comfortable and was kept in a, free from disturbance and so on and so forth like this. And the queen herself was, from the time that she conceived, she was morally pure. It means not breaking the precepts, not breaking the 5 precepts, having no sensual desire during that time. And then, you see, all of these things you can understand as signs of the special being that is going to be born at a later time. Now then, when we come to the delivery in the ancient India, it was customary for women to give birth in their maternal home. It's probably actually a relic from the time when there was not patriarchy but matriarchy, and the lineage would go down through the women, not go down through the men. So it's probably a relic of that time. But the delivery was supposed to take place in the matriarchal home. So when it came time for when it was approaching time, then Queen Mahamaya asked if she could return to her home in Devadaha. That's her home. The king's home is in Kapilavatthu, so there's some distance between these places. And then the king arranged everything, that there would be a chariot and that she would have attendants and that there would be guards, and they set off towards Devadaha. But on the way they came to a small grove that was between the 2 cities of Kapilavatthu and Devadaha. That place is called Lumbini. We now know it as Lumbini in what is now Nepal. Of course, there was no Nepal and there was no India at that time. But it was just a grove, a beautiful grove. They give really, in the commentaries, they give these really beautiful descriptions of the grove, with the birds and the bees and the flowers and the everywhere being really spectacularly beautiful and everything. But when they got to this grove, Mahamaya wanted to go into the grove and spend time there. But when she got there, then the signs of delivery came on. And as she lifted up her hand, then the tree bent down a branch like this, and she held onto the branch, and while standing she gave birth to the child. And the birth, it said, is not like a normal birth, which is, is very unclean and very impure, but the birth of the Bodhisattva, of course, cannot be unclean, it cannot be impure. It was done very easily, without the normal birth pains, and it was done very cleanly, without the normal accompanying mess, if you like. But anyway, when the Bodhisattva was born, then he was first received by the Brahma kings, the Mahabrahmas, and then he was passed to the 4 great kings, and then he was passed on to silk, which was held by the queen's attendants. And that's how he was born. And, we've set up at the Chaitya, we set up the Bodhisattva every year, and we do the bathing of the Bodhisattva, isn't it? Right. This is because when the Bodhisattva was born, then it said 2 springs of water, one hot water, one cold water, were poured magically, if you like, were poured magically over the Bodhisattva at the very right temperature and everything, and kind of gave him a magical bath. So when we bathe the Bodhisattva at the Chaitya, that's what it's emulating. That's what it's doing. It's celebrating the birth of pure being and then being washed. Okay, that took place on Vesak Day in traditional time, 623 BC, 623 BC, and in the commentaries they even worked out the day, and the day was a Friday. Okay, so on Friday, 623 BC, then the Bodhisattva was born. And then, miraculously, because all of these stories about the Bodhisattva, of course, have this miraculous element, miraculously, the Bodhisattva was able to walk as soon as he was born, and he first faced to the east, and then he faced to the south, he faced to the west, he faced to the north, and he took 7 steps. And then he said, we see with the Bodhisattva he's like this. This is because when he said this, he did like this. And he said, I am the greatest in the world. I am the elder in the world. I am the best in the world. This is my last birth. There is no more becoming for me. You see, again, it's like a prophecy of what would come later when he attained awakening, and he would not be reborn again. He would become the greatest person in the world, which is in fact what happened, of course. Of course, these things are like miraculous foretellings and things, but they have great meaning, I think, if you understand the symbolism that is implied in them. So he said like this, and then there was, at the time of the birth, there were also, they say, 32 wondrous things happened. I can't tell you all 32 wondrous things, but they're things like, the blind could see, the deaf could hear, the dumb could speak, the lame could walk, the fires in hell went out, and the lights in hell came on. I think this is an interesting one myself, because it said that in hell, not one being who is suffering can actually see another being who is suffering. There's no companionship in hell, Nobody knows that anybody else is there. They cannot see each other. But at the time that the Bodhisattva was born, they could all see each other and know that they had companions. I think it's also really quite meaningful, you see. Okay, another thing that happened at the time of the Bodhisattva's birth is that there were 7 others born at the same day, 7 other they're called conatals. Means sahajata. It means they appear on the same day. So one is Yasodhara, who would become the Bodhisattva's wife later. Yeah. Another is Ananda, who would be the Buddha's chief attendant. He was born on the same day. Another is Kaludayi. I told you Kaludayi's story, I think last time we were discussing the full moons. And Kaludayi was the person who invited the Buddha, after he had attained awakening, to go back to his hometown and to give teachings in his hometown. And then Channa and Kantaka. Channa is the groom and Kantaka is the horse on which the Bodhisattva left from Kapilavatthu and went on his great renunciation. And then also the Bodhi tree that the Lord Buddha would sit under was also appeared on the same day. And then 4 golden jars also appeared on the same day. So these are also wondrous things. It gives them some really close and like heart connection between these special people who figure in the life of Lord Buddha. Right? Now the newborn baby, after he had done this walk and told about how he was the greatest in the world, he was taken to the ascetic Kaludevya, who was the king's chief advisor. Yeah. And the king wanted to make the newborn baby worship, the most spiritually appreciated person in the household, you can say like this, who was Kaludevya. But when they brought him into the presence of this great ascetic, right, and they were trying to make him bow down, instead of his head coming down, his feet came up, and his feet were put on the head of the ascetic, like this, because the Bodhisattva, you see, is more, is in a higher state than even the ascetic Kaludevya, you see. And it said, if by chance, then the Bodhisattva had of worshipped Kaludevya, then Kaludevya's head would have split into 7 pieces. Yeah. Because, the Bodhisattva is such a superior being, having spent all this time fulfilling the perfections in samsara. But it happened the other way round, you see, that the feet of the Bodhisattva were put on the head of Kaludevila. Okay, and Kaludevila at that time was really astonished, of course, and he worshipped the Bodhisattva. And then he laughed, and then he cried. And the king, when he laughed, when the ascetic laughed, was very happy because it was so auspicious. And then when the ascetic cried, the king was very worried because it's very inauspicious. So he asked Kaludevila why he laughed and why he cried. And he said, the reason that I laughed is because there was such a great joy in my heart, because this baby is the Bodhisattva and he will become the Buddha. In the end, he will become the Buddha. And why did I cry is because before he becomes the Buddha, I will die, and I will never get the chance to meet him. And in fact, that is what happened. Kaludevila actually died before the Bodhisattva attained Buddhahood, and because of his great attainments, he had the abhinyas, he had the jhanas and so on, the samapatis, he was reborn in a high Brahmaloka. Okay? Then on the 5th day after the birth, it comes to the 2 events actually, which is the head washing ceremony, where it's like a consecration, you know, when they consecrated kings, but also with babies as well. They do a head washing ceremony like this, and a name giving ceremony, the day that they gave the name. So when they gave the name Siddhartha, as you know. Siddhartha, it really means one who has accomplished his purpose. You can say like this anyway. One who is accomplished. Siddha means accomplished. And atta, it actually has many meanings, but it means, in this context, it means his aim or his purpose or his reason, his raison d'être, his reason to be. So one who had accomplished his purpose, Siddhartha. And then they called in the 7 Brahmins, and the 7 Brahmin leaders in the household came, and then they saw on the Bodhisattva's body the 32 marks of a great man. Yeah. I also cannot tell you about these great marks because too many, you see. There's 32 great marks and there's 80 minor marks. But you know, when you see the Lord Buddha like he is here, some of those marks are taken from the description. Okay, and then they predicted. 6 of them said, the king asked what will become of this baby. And then they predicted that the baby would either become a Chakravarti king, a universal monarch who would rule over the continents, rule over the 4 continents, or if he went forth from the household life, then he would become a Buddha. But the 7th one, who was Kondanya, who will appear again later in our story, Kondanya said, no, there is not 2 destinies for this boy. He will not become a Chakravarti, universal monarch. He will become a Buddha. Actually, Kondanya is the person we know as Anya Kondanya, who was one of the 5 ascetics who was attendant on the Bodhisattva while he was doing his austerities, and was one of the group of 5 who heard the first teaching, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, and he is the first person who attained the first stage of awakening on that Asala full moon night, 35 years later. Yeah, and the other 4 were the sons of some of the other Brahmins who were present at that name-giving ceremony. So they had children, and 4 of them were the other 4 ascetics that joined the Bodhisattva. But that's getting ahead of the story a little bit. Okay, but you see, all of these things interconnected, and it's very interesting when you find out all these interconnections and how they all kind of fits together like some enormous jigsaw puzzle, all these people related together, appearing at different times in the story like this. And they're all related and connected with each other. And not only in this life as well, but have been connected in previous lives. It's one of the wonderful things that you find if you read the Jataka stories. Nobody reads the Jataka stories, unfortunately, these days. But you find that the people that we know in the Buddha's last life were also with him in his previous lives. So the obvious one, the great one, of course, is Yasodhara, who became his wife in his last life. But she was many, many times she was his wife in previous lives. They had a heart connection, a spiritual connection that kept them together through many lives in samsara, like this. But not only Yasodhara, but with many of the other people who appeared in the Buddha's last life. And that's how it is in samsara. If you have a deep heart connection with people, then you get reborn with those people. On the 7th day, then Mahamaya passed away. Okay. We saw during the time that Santusita was looking for the right person to be the mother, then he saw that she would only last for 10 lunar months and 1 week, and all the bodhisattvas' mothers, according to the traditional understanding, pass away 1 week after giving birth. That's one way to understand it. But as you know, the bodhisattva was actually born from the right-hand side, not from the vaginal canal, but from the right-hand side of the mother. And if you think about it, a different way of explaining this is that she was given a caesarean operation, and that the birth took place through caesarean section. And they did know of caesarean section at the time of the Lord Buddha. There's other reports of caesareans taking place, so we know that this was taking place. But of course they were extremely dangerous for the mother. Yeah. And quite likely there is a nugget of historical truth in the stories and the legends that grew up. And it's quite possible that the Bodhisattva was born by caesarean section, and the mother actually only lasted 1 week afterwards, because it's a very traumatic operation. Now it's not, of course, but in those days it would have been a very traumatic operation. But anyway, the mother passed away. So that is the story of the birth of the Bodhisattva, which is one of the events that we commemorate at Vesak. Okay, now then, moving on from there, then we also have to take up the story and find out what happened between then and the awakening, which is the second great event that took place at Vesak. So after Mahamaya's passing, then her sister, who was also married to King Suddhodana, her younger sister was Mahapajapati Gotami, and she took over the nursing of Siddhartha. She herself gave birth to the Buddha's younger brother, Nanda, 3 or 4 days after Siddhartha was born. So she was ready for nursing, but she gave out her own child to the nurses in the palace, and she took for nursing Siddhartha. So Mahapajapati Gotami was not only the Buddha's auntie, but also his foster mother and his milk mother as well. We can say like that. Now the king, of course, wanted his son to be, to succeed him and to be the king. And he had asked the Brahmins, when they had said that he will either become a Chakravarti universal monarch or he will become a Buddha, he asked them what would make him go forth from the household life. And they told about the 4 signs. If he saw these 4 signs, then he would go forth from the household life. So the king from that period would not allow in the palace or around the palace anybody who was old, anybody who was sick, anybody who was dead, or any samana. A samana is like an ascetic. So he wouldn't allow these sights to come within the range of the Bodhisattva, because these were the signs that the Bodhisattva would later see, and it would spur him to become an ascetic himself. So the king built up this kind of protective environment around the Bodhisattva so that he would be protected from the realities of the world, you can say. Okay. Now, one very important event that I can't tell all the events took place in the Bodhisattva's life because we have to move it on. But there's one very important event that refigures at the time of the awakening, and that was during the ploughing festival. Now, as you know, in traditional peasant societies, these festivals are of great significance and of great importance. Yeah, they signify something that is taking place in the world that is of great moment, you can say. So the ploughing festival is of great moment. If the ploughing goes right, if the seeds are put in right in the earth, yeah, later they come to fruition, and later there's a good crop, and everybody is reliant on there being sufficient food, on there being good crops. So the ploughing festival is a very important festival, you see. So the king himself would lead the ploughing festival. He went out, and the way they describe it, the plough that the king used is made of gold. The ploughs that the ministers used, because the ministers also took place in this festival, were made of silver. The ploughs that the normal people used were made of iron, of course. And this is during the Iron Age. Lord Buddha was born during the early Iron Age in India. Yeah. So the king went out for the festival, and then while the king was performing his function, leading this festival, the Bodhisattva was placed under a rose apple tree. It's what you call in Malay jambu. You know the jambu fruit. So the jambu fruit is also where we get Jambu Deepa from. Lord Buddha was born in Jambu Deepa. It's the continent where these jambu fruits grow. Now, as you know, if you know anything about jambu, and I'm sure some of you do, the tree is not actually very high or very tall, but it's tall enough for a young boy to sit under. So the nurses placed the boy under the jambu tree, and then they went off to enjoy the festival, and they left him there. And then the Bodhisattva, he sat again in cross-legged position under the tree with the shade of the tree over him, And while he was sat in cross-legged position, he entered into the first jhana, into the first absorption. Yeah. This becomes very important later when the Bodhisattva, as an ascetic, is trying to find the path to awakening. Yeah. So he sat there, and while he was sat there, it said that the sun went over, it's going over the horizon, but the shadow didn't move. The shadow stayed over the Bodhisattva to protect him. In the different version of this story, in Lalita Vistara, which is also a very early text, now remembered in the Mahayana scriptures, but it's a very early text, a life of the Lord Buddha, the Lalita Vistara, which I've made translations from before. It's a very interesting text. Then it said a different story is told, and I think this story also some of you will know, and it's quite of interest. So while the Bodhisattva was sat under the jambu tree, it said that he looked around, and then he saw worms crawling on the ground. Yeah. And frogs came along and ate the worms. And then birds came along and snatched up the snakes like this. And he got an insight, you see, into the dukkha nature of existence at that time. Of course, not fully developed as it would become later, but it's like the first real insight into the nature of life and everything. Yeah. So I think it's an interesting story because of this thing. On the one hand, in the Pali texts, then it's told that he attained jhana, which is one step towards getting clear vision of reality. In the other text, it's told that he had his first insight into the nature of reality, like this. Later, of course, as you know, then the Bodhisattva, still the king was trying to protect him from, from the realities of life, if you like, and he married him to Yasodhara. Yasodhara is actually his cousin, but cousin marriages, first cousin as well, but cousin marriages were quite common amongst royalty in those days. So he married his cousin, Yasodhara, and as you know, he had these 3 wonderful palaces, one palace for the rainy period, one palace for the winter period, one palace for the summer period. And he was kept in a life of real luxury, everything that he wanted, all the sensual pleasures that he could possibly desire were there for him at his fingertips. Beautiful women, wonderful food, complete comfort in different palaces, entertainment of the best kind, all like this. And this is how the king was trying to protect him from finding out about the nature of reality. But one time, the Bodhisattva asked whether he could go out in the chariot and go for a trip into the park. And so the king allowed him to do this. He first cleared everybody out of the park, so there's no sick people, no aging people, no dying people around. He cleared all the streets, and then he allowed the Bodhisattva to go out on the trip. But the Devadutas, the Devas who knew that it was time for the Bodhisattva to attain awakening, they came down from heaven, and one of them appeared as an old man in front of the Bodhisattva. Now it said only the Bodhisattva and the charioteer could see the old man. The other people around the town couldn't see, but the Bodhisattva could see, and the charioteer could see. So the Bodhisattva asked, he had never seen an old man before, and he asked the charioteer about this old man and said, what is this person, or what is this being who is bent over and is in such a decrepit state like this? And the charioteer explained, this is an old man. This is an old man. He's grown old and he's grown decrepit. He's bent over. His hair is grey. His teeth are broken. His skin is wrinkled like this. And the Bodhisattva asked, is this a special sort of being, or does this happen to everybody? And the charioteer told him, this is not special. This is what happens to everybody. Everybody grows old, as long as they live long enough, of course. Everybody grows old. Everybody gets grey hair. Everybody gets broken teeth. Right? Everybody gets wrinkled skin. Everybody gets bent over, so they're tottering about and can't walk properly, like this. And then the Bodhisattva was astonished, because he hadn't realized this before, and his mind was disturbed by what he had seen. And he said, charioteer, charioteer, don't take me for this trip into the garden anymore. Take me back to the palace. And so the charioteer turned the chariot round and took him back to the palace. And the Bodhisattva was very pensive, very thoughtful, and the king was also very disturbed to see how the Bodhisattva had reacted like this. He asked for more sensual pleasures to be made available to the Bodhisattva so that his mind would be taken off these things that he had seen. Between these 4 journeys, there's 4 months. Okay, it's also important because of the timing, you see. The first trip was at Asala, and then 4 months later, which would be Komuda, full moon night, then he went out on the second trip. And on the second trip he saw a sick man, a man who had got fever, who was obviously unwell, and he was sweating and in such a terrible physical state. And again he asked the charioteer, what is this? And he told him it's a sick man. And he asked, does everybody become sick? And the charioteer told, of course, everybody will get sick at some time or another. Nature is like this. Everybody is subject to sickness. And the Bodhisattva was again very disturbed by what he'd seen. And he told the charioteer, please take me back to the palace. And he went back to the palace. 4 months later, he came out, and again the Devadutas produced the vision of a corpse, somebody who was dead. He had never seen anybody who was dead either. And he asked the charioteer, is this a special being? Is this something? No, this is not a special being. All beings have a lifespan, and they come to, at the end of their lifespan, everybody dies. The Bodhisattva himself will one day die. Yeah. Again, he was very disturbed, you see, and he was taken back to the palace. And the king each time is trying to increase the sensual pleasures and trying to distract him. Yeah. You can understand this story, as a metaphor. In a way, it's a metaphor. While we're enveloped in sensual pleasures, we don't actually see the reality around us. The realities are that people are growing old. The realities are people are growing sick. The realities are people are dying. But occupied with sensual pleasures, we don't look at that. We look at the sensual pleasures instead. We don't want to see about people dying. Or if we do, we don't feel like it applies to us. Dying, of course, is something that always applies to somebody else. You don't see it applying to yourself. You see it applying to somebody else, like this. So in a way, it's like a metaphor. And the charioteer, you see, is like a metaphor of the intelligence. He's asking his buddhi, his intelligence, about this thing. And he's saying, he sees somebody who is sick, and he asks his higher intelligence, does this apply to me? And the charioteer, his buddhi, tells him, this applies to you. He sees an old man, does this apply to me? And he understands, this applies to me. A dead man, this applies to me, you see. It's the higher intelligence giving him insight into the nature of the world. Or at least this is the way that you can understand it anyway, as a metaphor on one level. And then the fourth time that he went out, which was on the following Asala, that's July, full moon night, he saw an ascetic. First time he'd also seen an ascetic. And he asked the charioteer about the ascetic. Who is this person wearing different clothes with his head shaved? What is he doing? Because he'd never seen before. And the charioteer explained to him that an ascetic is somebody who is engaged in good deeds only, and meditation, the development of the higher faculties, like this. And then the Bodhisattva understood that there was a different way of life, not only a life of fulfilling sensual pleasures, but there was a way of living a life as an ascetic, doing only good deeds, engaged in meditation, being careful about precepts and so on and so forth. So this was the fourth Devaduta that the Bodhisattva saw. And he went back to the palace. And then when he was in the palace at night, he's thinking about all these sights and these insights that he's had. And the girls, the dancing girls who were supposed to be entertaining him, saw that he was no longer interested, and they just kind of fell asleep. They were no longer playing their instruments and dancing. They fell asleep. And it said that, when he looked at them, it was like looking at a cemetery. These women were laying on the floor, some of them all disheveled, with their hair all over the place, with saliva dribbling out of their mouths, with sweat under their armpits, and just lying there like corpses in the palace. And he was repulsed by what was supposed to be bringing him sensual pleasures. He now saw in a different light. And then you can say he made up his mind that he himself must go forth from the home life into the homeless life, and he himself must become an ascetic. So he went to see his wife, and his wife that night indeed had given birth to their son. And he opened the door and he saw his wife holding his son to her breast like this. And his natural urge was to go over and just to hold his wife and to hold his baby, before he went forth. But he knew if he did that, then there was a chance his wife would wake up, and then he would not be able to overcome his attachments. So rather than going over to his wife and child, he quietly closed the door and went out of the palace to the stall where Channa and Kantika, Channa is the groom, Kantika is the horse, were waiting. And he asked to be taken out of the palace, out of the city, and he would go forth on his great renunciation. So that's at the Asala full moon night. You know, when we think of Asala in July, we think of Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. But other events took place on that night. One is the great renunciation. So Channa and Kantika were ready, and the prince got on the back of Kantika and they were going out, but there was some fear that Kantika, who was a great and marvelous horse, because of his neighing and because of the way that he runs with his feet pounding on the floor, he might wake somebody up. So the Devas came and they put down their hands underneath the horse's hooves so that nobody would hear him, so that he could go out of the city quietly. And then when they got to the gate, they were ready to jump over the gate. The Bodhisattva thought, I will just grip the horse and I will jump over the gate. And Channa thought, I will take the horse and I will jump over the gate. And Kantika himself, the horse thought, I will take the Bodhisattva and we will jump over the gate. But the Devas opened the gates for them. And so they were able to go out without being heard and without disturbing anybody. And then, in fact, Mara appeared and said to the Bodhisattva, don't go forth on this great renunciation. In 7 days itself, then the sign of the Chakravarti will appear and you will be anointed as the king. If you don't go forth, you will become the universal monarch, the one appointed to be the universal monarch. But even at that time, the Bodhisattva would not listen to Mara. And he put Mara aside and he carried on his great renunciation. And he went south, actually, from Kapilavatthu. Kapilavatthu is where the palace was. He went south from there, and he went through the Sakyan country. The Sakyan is his own people. He went through the Kolian country. I told you last time about the Kolians and the Sakyans nearly got into a war. He went through the Kolian country, and he went through the Malayan country as well, going south, ever farther away from his home. And then he got to the river Anoma. And when he got to the river Anoma, the horse, he was still on the horse, jumped over the river in one swoop and landed on the other side. And then you see the Sakyans, the Kolians, the Malayans, they're all related groups, but on the other side of the river, he was away from his relatives at that point. Yeah. And it's there that he took his sword, that you will see in many of the representations. He took his sword in one hand, and he took his hair in the other hand, and cut off his hair at that point. And two miraculous things happened. One thing is, if you look at the Lord Buddha now, you'll see that his hair is all in ringlets. From the time that he cut off his hair at the Great Renunciation, his hair turned into these ringlets like they are now, turning to the right, and his hair never grew again. He never cut his hair for the rest of his life. His hair stayed like this. And the hair that he cut off, he threw into the sky. And Sakka, the Lord of the Guards from Tavatimsa heaven, Sakka caught the hair, and it's the first real relic that is taken. And he took it back to Tavatimsa heaven, and there he built a chaitya for it. Yeah. That chaitya is still now in Tavatimsa heaven. It's the first actual chaitya. Afterwards, Gatikara Brahma, who was also a very important Brahma god, then he came down with the requisites that were necessary, the 8 requisites that are necessary for an ascetic. It means the robes and the bowl and the belt and the razor and so on and so forth, like this. So Gatikara Brahma brought these requisites to the Bodhisattva, and the Bodhisattva took off his clothes that he had been using. The Brahma took the clothes up to the Brahma heavens, and then built another chaitya in the Brahma heavens. That is called the Dusa chaitya. It means the clothes chaitya. Yeah. So that is the second relics. Those are relics of use. Yeah, the first relics are relics of the Buddhas, or the Bodhisattvas in this case, Bodhisattva's body. But the second one are relics of use. Okay, Channa and Kantaka went back to Kapilavastu and then gave the information to the family. But Kantaka, the horse, was so upset by losing his master, he died on the way. Then the Bodhisattva spent 7 days on the other side of the river Anoma, and then after that he pursued his southward course, and that's when he came to Rajagaha. Rajagaha is one of the main pilgrimage sites now in India, and you can still see fortifications of Rajagaha from Lord Buddha's time. If you go there, you can still see those fortifications. They still exist. So he went to Rajagaha, which was the capital of Magadha, and King Bimbisara was there. And then he went out on alms round in Rajagaha. And the king, King Bimbisara, who figures so largely in the suttas, in the early suttas, saw the Bodhisattva, and he was very, very impressed by seeing this ascetic. And he's going on Pindapat, and he has total control over his faculties, just looking sufficiently far ahead, not looking round, not attracted by sense objects, very calm in his demeanor, very wonderful presence and bearing that the Bodhisattva had. And then he asked, his ministers to find out where this wonderful being was staying. And his ministers followed the Bodhisattva back to Mount Pandava. Around Rajagaha there are mountains. So one of those mountains is called Pandava. And then he followed the Bodhisattva back to Mount Pandava, and Bimbisara himself came out in his chariot as far as the chariot would take him, and then he climbed the mountain and he met with the Bodhisattva. And when he met with him, he offered him half of the kingdom. Such a noble being, you see. And he offered him half of the kingdom. From the mountain they could see the kingdom of Magadha. And the Bodhisattva again, you see, was not tempted by glory and fame and wealth and honor. He was intent on his quest for awakening. And he turned the king down. But the king told him, you know, when you do attain awakening, you must come back to Rajagaha and give me teachings. Later the Lord Buddha would fulfill that request later in the story. So after that, he went even farther south from Rajagaha. He went down to the area around Gaya, which is south of Rajagaha. And it's there that he met Alara Kalama, who was his first teacher. And Alara Kalama was a very highly developed ascetic who had attained the first 7 jhanas, what we now explain as the first 7 jhanas. Akinchayatana is what he had attained to. These spheres, we say the 4 spheres and the 4 jhanas. So this was the 3rd sphere of nothingness. And in a very short time, the Bodhisattva also attained Akinchayatana. He was also able to attain to such a high level of meditative attainment. And Alara, who was a very highly developed person himself, you know, wasn't filled with envy or jealousy or fear about the Bodhisattva, but his heart was full of generosity, and he offered for the Bodhisattva to be his co-leader of the group. It's a very wonderful thing if you think about it. You know, sometimes when people are kind of coming up, and especially coming up quickly, then people, you know, want to put them down or chase them out or not have anything to do with it. But Alara, you see, really had a lot of kusala, really had a lot of wholesome mind states, and he wanted to have the Bodhisattva as his co-teacher. But the Bodhisattva knew that Akinchayatana, it doesn't lead to awakening. It isn't the final attainment. It isn't enough. And the quest was for awakening, you see. So he said, you know, it is not sufficient for attaining awakening. And he left from Alara's group, and he went and found the second group, which was Ramaputa's group. There's a lot of confusion about Ramaputta. Ramaputa means Rama's son. That's what it means in the Pali. Actual fact, Rama himself had attained the higher level of meditative attainment, Nevasanya Nasanya Ayatana, like this. But Ramaputta had not attained to that level. Rama had passed away. but they knew the teaching. So Ramaputta explained the teaching to the Bodhisattva, and the Bodhisattva attained to that high level of meditative attainment. And Ramaputta didn't say, come, we'll be leaders together, because Ramaputta himself was not at that level, you see. So he said to the Bodhisattva, you lead the group, you be in charge of the group. But again, the Bodhisattva understood and knew, this is not the end, this is not the fulfillment of my quest, this is not awakening. Yeah. So he left from that group as well. And then he went out into the forests in Gaya and began his period of austerities. Now his austerity periods were really tremendous feats of endurance, you can say, when he was doing his Dukkaracharya, his period of strenuous asceticism, where he was eating so little. Yeah. They say so little that when he touched his belly button, he also touched his spine. Yeah. Because there was nothing, no meat or anything between the... If you think about it, you might have seen pictures of people in Ethiopia during the Great Famine in the 80s, yeah, and you can see that actually does happen. If you starve sufficiently, there's nothing left in the belly. You've seen pictures of children in this state, a really terrible thing, of course. So the Bodhisattva practiced these austerities, and some days he would take 4 beans, but the next day he would take just 2 beans, and the next day he would just take 1 bean, and it's not sufficient for sustenance. So he became... You'll remember that there's this very famous statue of the Dukkaracharya time. It's kept in Lahore in Pakistan now, as the Bodhisattva really drawn away with his all his hair rotting away and his skin in a very bad condition like this. But also, not only did he restrain his food, but he also restrained his breath as well. So he would hold his breaths so that he was virtually keeling over because he wasn't getting any breath. And the gods were unsure whether he was still alive or not, going through these austerities. And they had to inquire whether he was still living or whether he had actually passed away because he had overdone the austerities. 6 years he was engaged in these austerities. It's a really, really long time. In the traditional teachings, they tell that there was a reason why he had to spend so long. Not all bodhisattvas spend 6 years, but our Lord Buddha Gautama, he had to spend 6 years in his Dukkaracharya. And then he remembered at that time the period when he had been sat under the rose apple tree. And he realized that actually was the path to awakening. That jhana that he had got at that time led to awakening. And he realized while he was exhausted, as he was at that point, he could not get stable mind. He could not get a stable and concentrated mind. And so he decided to go on alms round in the nearby village of Sainia. And he went out on alms round. It's when he went out on alms round that the group of 5 ascetics who had been attendants on him, they saw that he was taking food again, and they thought he's just given up. He's given up. There's no point in carrying on anymore. And the ascetics, in disgust, they left because he'd given up on what he had been attempting to do. And they left him at that point. One thing I want to say, by the way, is, earlier he had attained these jhanas with Alara and Udika. Yeah. And now he attained just the first jhana. But it was different jhana, you see. The jhanas that he had attained with the two great teachers were simple concentration jhanas, whereas the jhana that he had attained when he was a boy was based on mindfulness and insight. And it's mindfulness and insight that leads to awakening. That is the difference between those two jhana states, you see. It wasn't simply a jhana state, but a jhana state based on mindfulness of the body. Anapana. Okay, so that just clears one of these things up about this attainment. Then one morning he went out and he was sat under a tree, and Sujata came out, and she had been accustomed to giving offerings to a tree. Sometime before, actually, it must have been 21 years before, she had gone to that tree and she had made an offering, and she had said, if my offering is worthy, then may the tree deva bless me with a child. And she had become pregnant and she had given birth. She actually gave birth to Yasa. Yasa is the sixth person to attain awakening later. Okay. That is Sujata's son. But every year, because she had made this vow, she went out and she made offerings at the tree. And then she gave offerings of milk rice to her servant, Punya, and Punya took it to the tree, and when she came to the tree, she saw the Bodhisattva, and she thought, it's the tree deva come out of the tree and sat at the bottom of the tree. So she came back to Sujata and said, the tree deva has come and is sitting at the foot of the tree. And so Sujata herself came, and then she gave this milk rice to the Bodhisattva. 49 pindas, 49 rice balls were in this offering that she gave, which was one rice ball, if you like, for the next 49 days that he would spend when he didn't eat after he attained awakening around the Bodhi tree. And then after he had taken these pindas, after he had taken, that's where we get the word pindapat from here, pindachara. Pinda is a rice ball. Okay, so when he had taken these rice balls and he had finished, he took his bowl and he made a determination. He said, if I'm to attain awakening today, may this bowl float upstream. And he threw the bowl into the stream, and the stream's coming this way, and the bowl flew upstream, or went upstream like this. And it's like a confirmation, a supernatural confirmation, that he also would go upstream, you see, to awakening. So, from there, he moved towards the Bodhi tree, which is, the Bodhi tree at what we now call Bodh Gaya. And as he was going, he met a Brahmin grass cutter called Satya. And Satya gave him 8 handfuls of kusa grass. Kusa grass is very fragrant grass. In fact, even today in India, they will use kusa grass at the sacrifices, the Brahminical sacrifices, but they also use it around the house to keep away mosquitoes and creatures like this. It's a very fragrant grass. So he gave this grass, and the Lord Buddha took it and he threw it at the foot of the Bodhi tree, and as it landed at the foot of the Bodhi tree, it turned into a diamond throne, the Vajrasana. Yeah, what we now call the Vajrasana, the diamond throne underneath the Bodhi tree, where the Lord Buddha sat. And he made this vow, may my skin dry up, may my bones become dust, may my sinews and flesh just dry up, but I will not rise from the diamond throne until I have attained awakening. And then Mara, old Mara, who had been following him for 6 years from the time that he had gone out from his renunciation, looking all the time. Mara was looking for unwholesome thoughts of sensuality, unwholesome thoughts of hatred or anger, unwholesome thoughts of delusion to appear in the Bodhisattva's mind. He had been chasing him and looking for these for 6 years and had not found them. So Mara knew that the Bodhisattva was on the verge of awakening, and he decided he must bring all his powers to bear to prevent the Bodhisattva from attaining awakening, which would lead to the release of beings from samsara, which were under Mara's sway. So he brought all his armies, devas of various sorts, to attack the Bodhisattva. And he stirred up cyclones to attack the Bodhisattva. And he brought out tsunamis to attack the Bodhisattva, and he threw stones and rocks to attack the Bodhisattva, and he threw weapons at the Bodhisattva, and hot coals were thrown at the Bodhisattva, and hot sand and hot mud were also thrown at the Bodhisattva. And at the end he brought darkness all over the earth to try to prevent the Bodhisattva from attaining awakening. But none of these things was sufficient to put the Bodhisattva off his quest for awakening. And the Bodhisattva, of course, during all this period, 4 immeasurables, 100,000 aeons, such a long period, had fulfilled the paramis, generosity, virtue, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truth, determination, loving kindness, and equanimity. He had fulfilled all these paramis, and he was ready for the time of awakening. And he called on the earth to bear witness that he was worthy to be sat on the Vajrasana, and the earth bore witness to the Bodhisattva, and Mara was overthrown and was washed away along with his hordes, and the Bodhisattva was left at the end of the day, on the Vesak full moon day, sitting at the foot of the Bodhi tree. And then during the night, in the first watch of the night, he attained Pabbe Nivasanusanana, which is knowledge of his previous lives. He remembered all the previous lives that he had been through. He knew what his name was, he knew what his family was, he knew what his position in the society was, he knew what food he had eaten, he knew what pleasure and pain he had experienced, and he knew what lifespan he had attained. And he remembered one life, and he remembered 2 lives, 3 lives, 4 lives, 5 lives, 10 lives, 50 lives, 100 lives, 1,000 lives, 10,000 lives, 1,000,000 lives, 1,000,000,000 lives, tens of thousands of billions of lives he could recall. And he knew what his name was, he knew what his family was, he knew what his position was. In all of those lives he gained complete insight into his journey through samsara in the first watch of the night. And in the second watch of the night, he attained to the Dibbachakunyana. The Dibbachakunyana is knowledge of the rising and falling of beings according to their actions, good and bad. So he saw that certain beings had made good actions and had got good results, good rebirths, and other beings had made bad decisions in their lives and they had got bad rebirths because of it. So it's an insight into the workings of karma and vipaka and how that affects rebirth. Yeah, it's a really deep insight into the nature of reality. That was the second insight that he got on the night of awakening. And the third insight that he attained is Asavakya Jnana, which is when he realized the truth of the 4 noble truths: suffering, the arising of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and what was the path to the cessation of suffering. And then when he knew the 4 noble truths, at that time he had destroyed the pollutants, the asavas. He had completely destroyed the asavas and he had awakened to full and complete sambodhi, total awakening, just before dawn on Vesak night, which was a Wednesday, 588 BC. So that was the awakening of the Bodhisattva. Following the awakening, because we now have to move on to the Parinibbana, many events followed, of course, that you're aware of, but I can only summarize some of these events. He spent 7 weeks around the area of the Bodhi tree, 1 week under one tree, another week under another tree. And then Brahma Sahampati appeared to him and requested the Buddha to go and preach the doctrine. And there was some hesitation, but he agreed. He saw with his insight that some people are ready for awakening, and so he agreed to go and give his teaching. And he walked over to Benares, most specifically to Isipatana or Sarnath, and there he preached the Dhammacakka Pavatana Sutta on the Asala July full moon night. And then in that rains retreat, the rains retreat follows the July night of the July full moon night. In that rains retreat, Yasa, Sujata's son, who we had met earlier in the story, came out from Varanasi, and he attained awakening. And then his friends came out, 55 of his friends came out, and they attained awakening. And at the end of that rains retreat, there were 61 arahats in the world, and the Lord Buddha sent them out in different directions to go and give the teachings to the people for the happiness of people, for the welfare of all beings. And he himself headed back towards Gaya, where he had attained awakening. He met with the 3 Kassapa brothers. He converted the Kassapa brothers and their 1,000 disciples. And with that 1,000 disciples, he went into Rajagaha to fulfill his promise to King Bimbisara. And he gave the teaching to King Bimbisara. King Bimbisara also attained to stages of awakening. And then from there, he went to Kapilavatthu, eventually went to Kapilavatthu. And as we saw a couple of months ago, that was also on Vesak full moon day, when he arrived in Kapilavatthu and gave teachings to his family, and then his family, his father, and then his brother, and then his son, and also, for that matter, his sister and other members of his family also were brought into the Sangha and attained awakening. Right, now for 45 years, the Lord Buddha was giving his teachings throughout ancient India, traveling by foot all the time to different places to see different groups. He taught kings and queens, but he also taught outcasts and beggars. He taught merchants, the rich merchants and treasurers that were there in this newly budding society. And he also taught the workers, the people who were at the lowest position in society. He taught Brahmins. As I've said before, the majority of the early members of the Sangha were actually Brahmins, the educated classes, and he taught the other ascetics as well. Many ascetic groups were also around during Lord Buddha's time, wanderers and Jainas and so on and so forth. And the Dhamma, that he taught, it's collected in about 17,000 suttas, 17,000 teachings that come down to us from the Lord Buddha, collected in the Sutta Pitaka at present. And as it works out, it's about one teaching for one day. But some of those teachings are enormous. Some of those teachings are very, very long, 100 pages or more in translation. Some, of course, are only short as well. So there are also short teachings, just a paragraph and whatever like this. But the suttas are what constitute the teachings that come down to us. And it's like an enormous, multifaceted diamond. Just like all of these things connect up in the Lord Buddha's lives, as in the Bodhisattva's lives and in the Buddha's life, all these people are joined up together in certain relationships and everything like this. When we read the Lord Buddha's teaching, it's like looking at a multifaceted diamond. And you look at it from this angle and it tells you one story, and you look at it from that angle and it tells you another story, and you look at it from another angle and it tells you another story. But all the time it's telling you about the reality of life on earth and how it arises, how it ceases, and the path to get to the cessation. So the Lord Buddha's teaching is really, really a wonderful thing that's unparalleled in human teaching. Even today, when they've got video recordings and all this sort of thing, we don't get so many teachings from these gurus and all the rest of it, and these acharyas and ajahns and all this sort of thing. But Lord Buddha's teaching is an incredible gift to the world, explain the path in its different facets from different angles. Now the Lord Buddha spent the first 20 rains retreats in different places. But after the 20th rains retreat, when he was about 55, from that time onwards, for the next 24 years, he spent those years at Savatthi. And now when we look at the Sutta Pitaka, we find that most of the teachings, but not by any means all, but maybe 40% of the teachings or 50% of the teachings are actually positioned at Savatthi. Yeah. It must have been a major teaching center. There were major monasteries there that Anathapindika had built for the Lord Buddha, and that Visakha had built for the Lord Buddha. And he not quite alternated, but he spent some of those rains retreats at Anathapindika's monastery, Jetavana, and he spent some at the eastern monastery, which was Visakha's monastery. But the last rains retreat he didn't spend at Savatthi. He came down to Vaisali, and he spent the last rains retreat at Belua, which is just outside Vaisali. Vaisali is the capital of the Licchavis kingdom. Okay. After the rains retreat, he started a walk, which would be the last walk, the last charika that he would make. And he started walking north, back actually towards Kapilavatthu, which was his hometown. But very slowly he was walking, still giving teachings along the way. Those teachings are recorded now in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which records the last year of the Lord Buddha's life. Yeah. And during that period, he was giving the last teachings that were to be given to the Sangha specifically, and to the 4 assemblies as well. Because during the rains retreat, the Lord Buddha had fallen ill with dysentery. And he was very, very weak and very, very ill. But he suppressed that illness, and he managed to suppress it for about 9 months. He suppressed that illness because he needed to give the final teachings to the Sangha and to the Chatuparisa, the 4 assemblies. So he started on this long last walk in towards the Himalayas in what was Jambudipa in those days, and giving these various teachings along the way. And when he got to Pava, there he met Chanda the smith. And Chanda was the person who made the Lord Buddha's last meal. Yeah. There's disputes, as you know, about this last meal, but in the Pali it quite clearly says that the last meal that was offered to the Lord Buddha was tender pork, like this. There are other things. Sometimes they want to say that it was the 5 products of a cow, or an elixir of life, or bamboo shoots that had been trampled down by pigs, or mushrooms. But in the Pali it says very clearly that it was tender pork. And the Buddha ate this tender pork, and after he had taken the meal, he fell ill. As I've explained before, the commentaries are at pains to point out that the meal did not cause the illness, but after the meal he fell ill. So you have to fall ill at some point. It was after the meal that he fell ill, not because of the meal. He had already fallen ill 9 months before. And 3 months before this point, he had already given up the will to live on. Yeah. At the Magha full moon night. So he told Ananda he wanted to go to Kusinara. And Ananda said, why go to Kusinara? Kusinara is just a small town, just an insignificant town. It's not a worthy place for a Buddha to pass away. And the Buddha explained that what was now Kusinara had been a great city in previous times, and it was the city where Mahasudassana, which was the Bodhisattva himself, had been a great king, and he had lived there, and he described the glories of Kusinara in the previous times, and that it was really a place worthy of a Chakravarti king, a universal monarch, to have been living, and he had been that universal monarch. Mahasudassana. It now forms the Mahasudassana Sutta in Digha Nikaya. Digha Nikaya 17, one of the long discourses of the Buddha. And then when he got to just outside Kusinara, he lay down between two sala trees. Previously, when he had been born, he had also been born under a sala tree. When Mahadevi had held the branch of the tree, that was the sala tree. And now, between two sala trees, he lay down on his final resting place. And the devas from all over the universe assembled around. The Brahmas came down, all from the heavens, all the devas and the Brahmas and all the celestial beings of great power came down, and they rained down flowers and perfumes over Lord Buddha at that time. But the Lord Buddha said, this is not how I am worshipped when I am properly worshipped. I am not properly worshipped by the offerings of flowers, by the offerings of incense, by the offerings of scented water. I am properly worshipped when people understand my teachings and put my teachings into practice. That is the highest worship that you can do of the Lord Buddha, is to put the teachings that he had given to you into practice. Yeah. Then Ananda went into Kusinara, and he told the Mallas of Kusinara that the Lord Buddha was going to pass away on that night, and that they should come and pay their last respects. Do not let it be said that the Lord Buddha passed away in Kusinara and you didn't come and pay respect to him before he passed away. And so the Mallas came out. Mallas are a people, you know. The Mallas came out and were paying respect family by family to the Lord Buddha all through the night. And then a very interesting thing happened. One wanderer, Paribhajika, you see, heard that the Lord Buddha, who he had never met, was going to pass away on that night. And he realized it's his final opportunity to come and get teachings from the Lord Buddha, who he had heard about, but who he had never met. So he came and he told Ananda he wants to meet the Lord Buddha. And Ananda said, seeing that he's a member of a foreign sect, you see, an outsider, he said, no, do not bother the Lord Buddha when he's lying on his deathbed. And Subhadra said, but this is my last chance. Maybe I won't get the chance to meet the Buddha again. Then you must give me permission. And Ananda said, no, you mustn't bother the Lord Buddha when he's lying on his deathbed. And a third time he asked for permission, and the third time Ananda turned him down. And the Lord Buddha said, what is it that you're talking about? What are you discussing within my hearing? And Ananda said, there is this outside ascetic who wants to worship you. And he said, Ananda, do not turn anybody away when they want to hear teachings from the Buddha. Yeah. Even now it's the same, you see. If people come and ask for teachings from the Sangha, we never turn them away. Yeah. We don't turn people away from the teachings of the Lord Buddha. And the Lord Buddha, as his last act, would not turn anybody away, even though he's preparing for his parinibbana. So Ananda was told to bring Subhadra to the Lord Buddha, and Lord Buddha gave teachings to Subhadra. Subhadra was ordained and he attained arahatship, and he is the last direct disciple of our Lord Buddha. At the very last moment he got ordination. At the very last moment he attained arahatship. And later in that night, then the Lord Buddha attained the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth. And then he came down through the jhanas back to the first jhana, and then he attained the second jhana, and then he attained the third jhana, and then he attained the fourth jhana, and then on the Tuesday night of Vaisakha, 543 BC, the Lord Buddha entered parinibbana and passed away, never to return. After the Lord Buddha had passed away, then various people, various beings, you can say, spoke verses over the Lord Buddha's body. So one of the people was Brahma Sahampati, another was Anuruddha, one of his main disciples, another was Ananda. I can't explain all of these, but one other was Sakka, the Lord of the gods, and he said something which everybody knows, has heard many, many times. Anicca vata sankara, upadavaya dhammino, upajjitva nirujanti, tesan vupasamo sukho. Impermanent indeed are all processes. Arisen, they have the nature to decay. After arising, they come to cessation, and the stilling of them is blissful. When we do the chanting at the coffin, when somebody has passed away, this is the verse that we chant at that time. Anicca vata sankara. Yeah. That's the verse that was spoken by Sakka, Lord of the gods, when the Lord Buddha passed away at that time. And then when the Lord Buddha passed away, some of the people who were with him had not attained awakening. And they threw themselves on the ground and they rolled around from left to right, and they cried and called out, "Too soon has the Buddha left us. Too soon has the great Samana gone away." But others, who were arahats, understanding impermanence, knew that this is the nature of reality. Whatever has arisen, even Buddhas who have arisen, have the nature to pass away, and they didn't grieve over what must be. Okay, so such is the nature of the third event that took place at the Vesak night. That was a Tuesday night in 543 BC. After the Lord Buddha passed away, just to bring it to a completion, then there was 7 days of mourning, and the Malayans prepared like a mourning festival for the Lord Buddha, and then they prepared the body like they prepared the body of a universal monarch, wrapped in silk. 500 cloths of silk were wrapped around the Lord Buddha's body, and then they were ready for the cremation of the Lord Buddha. But when they took the fire, they could not light the bier. The reason that they couldn't set fire to the bier on which the Lord Buddha was lying after those 7 days was because Mahakassapa had not come and paid his last respects to the Buddha. So the fire could not be lit until Mahakassapa had arrived and worshipped with his forehead at the feet of Lord Buddha. And after that, after he had paid his respects, right, the bier spontaneously burned, spontaneously burst into flames, and the cremation took place. And the Lord Buddha had explained that there's 4 people who are worthy of stupas. Yeah. The 4 people are Samma Sambuddha, are worthy of a stupa. Yeah. A Pacceka Buddha, who is awakened by himself, is worthy of a stupa. An Arahat is also worthy of a stupa. And a Chakravarti universal monarch is also worthy of a stupa. So after the Lord Buddha had been cremated, they collected the relics, the bones and ash that was left over from the cremation. And then there was nearly a war broke out over these relics, because Ajatasattu sent from Magadha and said, you know, I am a Kshatriya and the Lord Buddha was a Kshatriya. I am worthy of having those relics. You must give them to me. But the Vaisalians also wanted the relics. And the Kapilawati and Sakyans said, it's our relative, it's our son. We want the relics. And the Bulas of Alakappa wanted the relics, and the Kolians wanted the relics. And they were almost brought to a war. But there was one Brahmin, Dona, and Dona said, I will split the relics up evenly, and then everybody can be satisfied. And what he had collected it in made another relic that was taken away for another site, and the ashes were also taken away for another site. So eventually the relics were split into 10 sections like this. And it's those 10 sections that were later divided up yet again by King Asoka and spread into the 84,000 viharas that he built throughout his empire. Yeah. Even the relic that we have in our relic container here is from Kapilavatthu. This relic was actually rediscovered only in about 1971 or something like that. It had been buried in a deep inner chamber where the relic thieves had not been able to find it. Yeah. So those relics, and we have one share of here, actually they're believed to have come from the actual body of Lord Buddha at that time. Okay? So everybody say sadhu.
That concludes today's program. If you have any questions about the contents of our broadcast, please feel free to reach out to us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Our dedicated team remains committed to sharing the profound teachings of the Buddha, helping you walk the path of wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time. Namo Buddhaya.